Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest is Pulitzer Prize-winning author William Kennedy, who's in Tulsa to accept the Peggy V. Helmerich Distinguished Author Award from the Tulsa City County Library System. Welcome, Mr. Kennedy. William, it's nice to have you here.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you.
All of us who've sat in writing classes and shuffled rejection slips have fantasized about what it might be like to win the Pulitzer Prize. What is it like? Does Ed McMahon come in with the prize wagon and say, "Here's your Pulitzer"?
Actually, I learned about it from the McNeil-Lehrer report. They called me up and said that I was a finalist, and would I be around? They called me around noontime, and would I be around at 3 or 4 in the afternoon? I said I would. I'd be home. I was working. And they called back and said, "Well, you won." And actually, Columbia and the Pulitzer Committee never got through because the phone started ringing, and I didn't hear from them until the following day. But the TV crews started showing up, and everybody calling and congratulating me, and so on. And of course, we had a couple of parties immediately. And,
I'm sure so.
Yeah.
Did you know that you were even in contention for the award?
No, and I never thought that book would be a likely candidate. I didn't. I thought Ironweed would never. I had not thought of ever winning a Pulitzer. I just don't. Prizes weren't something that were part of it. I thought I might someday win a Pulitzer for. Journalism, if I got lucky and got a great assignment, and I was nominated once for a series I did in Albany in 1965. I did a series on slums and how black families and integration and housing and so on, and but that didn't happen. But I was delighted to be nominated, and. But that's where I thought about the Pulitzer. Up as fiction, I never did. I just.
You think sometimes we as beginning writers, and I put myself in that category, and aspiring writers, we sometimes think if we receive an award, outside validation, that's what counts. But that's not exactly right. It's inside validation, isn't it?
Well, when you're a young writer aspiring to be a novelist, you can't even call yourself a writer. Until you publish something, and then you can say, "Okay, I'm a writer," and that is the validation when it gets published, and you're out there in the world, and it's not a lasting thing necessarily. I know a lot of friends of mine who've been writers for many years, published 3, 4 novels, and then suddenly they can't publish their novels again. And this is a very common occurrence, and. I was talking to my agent the other day, and he said books are down 40% since 9/11, and this is just another bad development for publishing and for writers. But I think we'll survive if we go the way of poetry. We might as novelists. And be subordinate to the internet and the e-publishing or whatever it might become. But we're, that isn't really why you continue to be a writer. You might have one book in you and then do it and be done with it. And some people are like that. But most writers write because they have to write, no matter what else they do in the world, because it's what they do. It's like if you're a scientist or a physicist or an astrophysicist or a bricklayer. If you know what you're doing and it's the way you make your living and it's the way you're psychically at ease in the world, it's a necessity. People say to me all the time, if I only had the time to write. Well, they're not writers, because you will find the time. You work all hours of the day and night, and you work 2 jobs or whatever, and you find a way to get your work done. And all the writers I know who've succeeded are like that, you know.
I've wondered, with the Pulitzer, of course, you get new notoriety, and you're celebrated. There are William Kennedy weeks and William Kennedy celebrations and William Kennedy awards and all sorts of things. Is it hard balancing your public persona as a writer with an actual writing life?
It gets intrusive, but it's not hard. It's easy. Writing is hard. Being celebrated for your writing is a piece of cake, and a big piece, and a very delicious piece. It's fun, and you know, it's a lot of social obligations, which have not ever bothered me in this life, and I, you know. You get a little more money for your work, and you
all the better.
You know, get more readers. So
no recluse is he.
No, I did. You know, I never understood J.D. Salinger, and much as I liked his work very much, I never could understand his psychic behavior, his withdrawal, and his refusal to publish. Even though I understand he keeps writing, it's because the writers write to be published, and except for him.
Well, you started out as a journalist, and then you wrote your first novel, The Ink Truck, which is based on something that actually happened, but it's fiction.
Well, it's not really based. There was a newspaper strike, and I was in it, and I walked the planks, and there was an ink truck that came to deliver. I never knew until the strike that ink came in trucks.
No, I never knew that. It's fascinating.
But it does. And,
I'd hate to run into one.
And it just looks like an oil truck, except it's smaller. And there was this event where they were trying to picket the ink truck, and it just stuck in my imagination. And I thought there were so many foolish things that happened during that strike that I wrote it as a short story. And then after a couple of years went by, and I expanded it into a novel, a very surreal comic odyssey of a newspaper man. The ink truck is a small part of it, but it becomes sort of like a publishing venture, like Bailey's first novel is when he gets to drain the ink truck, you know. And he doesn't quite make it. You know?
Well, A.R. Gurney visited us, and he used to work in the Enid, Oklahoma ice cream factory. So, you know, I guess all these things are very important. But there's a fine line, isn't there, between truth and fiction? When you say that you write a novel, and some people say, well, you know, there actually was this strike, but yet it is fiction. And when you live in the town you write about, does that become more of a factor that people say, oh, I know who this character is, or this character is based on a person I've known?
Well, it happens to me all the time because it's the way it is. I use real people frequently. You know, Legs Diamond was killed in Albany. He was a very famous figure. He was on the front pages every day for months in 1931. 1930, 31. I mean, he was living upstate and coming into Albany for pleasure nightclubs and whatnot. And he was also moving beer and whatnot, a bootlegger, you know. And he was a big bootlegger, and he was so famous. And I just followed the real line of his life, and what I had to do, of course, was make him up, because nobody alive was around to really tell me what he said to his girlfriend or his wife or his brother, or you know, or to the people who arrested him. There were certain quotations were available from his testimony and before judges when he was arraigned and things like that, but or to newspaper people, he gave some interviews. But basically, you know, the writer is a liar, and he must be a liar as far as I'm concerned. He has to transform what is actual into the imaginative truth, which is usually not true. And it's an enhanced form of telling the truth that maybe is more significant than the facts themselves might be, because what the writer is trying to do is synthesize and understand, and therefore manipulate time and consolidate events, fuse two major events into one. Anything like that is it's not only fair game; it's expected. You really must invent out of whole cloth in a certain way. Some part of the book has to be so new to you that your imagination is engaged, and you're beginning to get excited yourself at discovering what the unknown is, and that's an element that's constant in the writer's life, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I can't speak for every writer. Some writers create themselves straitjackets for themselves and block designs, and they write them block by block in advance, and they know exactly what happens in each block. I've never been that way, and nor do I ever want to be. I mean, to me, the excitement is discovering what's new.
I love what Grace Paley says, that any story told twice is fiction. And I think you mentioned Legs, and Legs is the beginning of the Albany Cycle. When you wrote Legs, and it's a first-person novel, and the lawyer narrator, when you wrote this book, did you see this as the beginning of a cycle?
Oh,
did you know what
no.
was ahead, or you thought it was going to be a standalone book?
I thought so. I didn't know what would come next, but when I started to think about the next book, Legs had elements in it that I discovered when I was writing it. I mean, I researched the kidnapping of, in the book, it's Patsy McCall, the political boss. He's a small figure in Legs. I'm not even sure he's named, but he runs the city of Albany and the county of Albany. He's just the boss behind the scenes. And his nephew was kidnapped and held for $250,000 ransom. And he was held for 2 or 3 weeks. It was a huge, sensational case, one of the great kidnapping cases of the 30s. And the last, I think, really by an organized gang, because they cracked down on kidnapping pretty strongly in those days, and the boy was eventually ransomed, and the people who were involved in the kidnapping, some of them had been working for Legs Diamond, and I knew that, and so that sort of generated something, the idea of doing the next book, which was Billy Phelan's Greatest Game, and Billy. I always wanted to write about Billy because he was my uncle, and and he was a pool hustler and a champ bowler, a kind of champ, nighttime champion around the saloons and the bowling alleys, which was in a very raffish time. And when I had this, putting Billy Phelan and my uncle and the kidnapping and Patsy McCall all together, I really wanted it to be a political novel. So I set it not in 1933 as it really happened with the people who were around Diamond, but 1938, so it would be a political year when there was a governor running for office. Tom Dewey is trying to break the political machine. He's the governor of New York State, and I mean, he's trying to be governor. He's the district attorney in New York City, and he's trying to break the machine in Albany the same way he broke Tammany put some of the Tammany bosses in jail. So that's the mix, that's the historical events, and then you just weave them and change them, and I reinvented my uncle also, although I got a great many wonderful stories and funny lines from him. He was a great storyteller himself.
I read somewhere that a lot of people think that this is their favorite of the Albany Cycle.
Oh, I hear that all the time.
Why? Do you have any idea why that is?
I always ask them that, and I think they like Billy. I think that's the one thing that they like Billy, and he's such a I guess a fully dimensional character and a very likable guy, and tough-minded, and in a certain way wrong-headed, but that he follows his own direction, and it gets him in a great deal of trouble. I don't know why. Maybe you know. Do you know?
Well, I think it's a wonderful, I like all the books. It's hard for me to take one out of the cycle because I see them as a whole. And I'm interested in I think Legs and Billy Fallon's and the Ironweed, I think all of them work together for me. So I don't know the secret
Well,
to
I
it.
don't know either. I mean,
I have trouble picking favorites anyway of anything.
People love Ironweed, I know that, and
Yes.
that's got a great following. The mail I've gotten on that is quite extraordinary for me.
It's a wonderful, wonderful book.
And some people are put off because it's bums and so on, that they couldn't get with it or something like that.
And of course, this carries on with the Phelan family, and which is terrific. Now, you get these wonderful letters. This book won a Pulitzer Prize, but prior to that, there were a few little problems with Ironweed. It wasn't just snapped up right away by the publishers.
Well, actually, it was. It was sold before it was finished, and through a publishing fluke, it was not. It was not published after it was finished. My editor left, and the people who took over after he left weren't as enthusiastic about it as he had been, and also Billy Phelan was trailing me because Billy had not done very well. They had not published it very well, but I mean, under different circumstances, it might have done well. I mean, it's a very popular book, and it's since sold extraordinarily well in paperback. And it's, as you say, it's so many people's favorite novel and of my books, and so I can't entirely take the blame for the fact that it went down the drain. But with the dark past of Billy and the fact that nobody thought this was going to make any money, I got a letter from one of the people after I left the publishing house that was going to publish it, and then it went around to 13 other publishers and came back to the same publisher, and it was published. But the one person on that negative cycle wrote me a letter and said, nobody has ever written better about this kind of subject matter, but I can't publish another book on my list that won't make any money. And so what's the writer to say to that? You've written a book that everybody thinks is terrific, and but they don't want to lose money on it. And
but the great justice is you won the Pulitzer with this book, and
I made a lot of money on it.
And good. I love to hear the made money stories. Would you read the opening paragraph for us, so we can get a sense of you reading your own words? This passes the jealousy test. I wish I had written this opening paragraph.
Riding up the winding road of St. Agnes's Cemetery in the back of the rattling old truck, Francis Phelan became aware that the dead, even more than the living, settled down in neighborhoods. The truck was suddenly surrounded by fields of monuments and cenotaphs of kindred design and striking size, all guarding the privileged dead. But the truck moved on, and the limits of mere privilege became visible. For here now came the acres of truly prestigious death. Illustrious men and women, captains of life without their diamonds, furs, carriages, and limousines, but buried in pomp and glory, vaulted in great tombs built like heavenly safe deposit boxes or parts of the Acropolis. And yes, here too, inevitably came the flowing masses, row upon row of them under simple headstones and simpler crosses. Here was the neighborhood of the Phelans.
Oh, it's beautifully written. And Francis is coming back after 22 years. What brings someone back after 22 years?
Well, he came back to vote.
Oh, that's real important.
You got a $5 vote, and he votes 21 times, and he makes $105, and he gets arrested. And actually, he gets arrested after he has met Martin Doherty, who was an old neighbor of his, a newspaper man, who is a very good friend of Francis's son, Billy. And so they meet in Billy Phelan. And Billy, who is broke and has kept a bet, held a bet, he's a bookie, among other things, and he owes $800 to Martin Doherty, and he can't pay it. So he has to go out and raise it, and he begins to go out and hustle and play cards and play pool and bowling and whatnot. So, and borrowing money, doing anything he can to pay off his debt. So he runs into his father, who is in jail, and he's made about $500 of the $800, and he puts up the $500 for bail for his father. So he gets his father out of jail, and they go out to have a little food together, and with Martin, and he invites his father to come home. He's been away for 22 years, and Francis doesn't even know how to behave. He has to run away from this conversation, but he's so taken with Billy's invitation and discovers the fact that nobody knew why he really left home, and nobody in the family, because he dropped his infant son, Gerald, when he was 13 days old, and that's why he's in the cemetery. He's going back to see his son in his grave, and which he does. And he has this discovery that his wife, Annie, has never told a soul, including her children, about him dropping the baby. And that was why he left, because he couldn't face the shame of it. He had a few beers, and he wasn't drunk, but people would say he was drunk, and that he dropped his son and killed the baby. And he was traumatized, and so he left. And he left and stayed away. And now he's back. He actually has come back. If you read Very Old Bones, one other one of my novels, you see that he comes back in 1934 for his mother's funeral and her wake. And he's now back in the close to the family for the first time since 1916, and this is 1938. And so seeing his son Billy fully grown, hearing about his wife never having told on him, it begins to change him, and he decides he'll try it. And so he makes these false starts at going home. He walks up and sleeps in a barn across from the house, and he couldn't bring himself to go to the house. But eventually he does go, and he re-enters for brings a turkey, and talks to his wife and his daughter, and then he's back in the family again, and that's the center of the book. It's the crux. It's not quite the climax of the book, but it comes to be as he goes into the family's history and finds out what's been happening, and his daughter, who was hostile to him, and so on. It's complicated. There's too much to recap the whole story, but it gets into the evolution of the man's life, and he keeps reliving it as the story goes on. He sees these ghosts of his own past and his violent history, and protecting himself, or somebody wants to cut his feet off to take his shoes, and he tries to save a fellow, and he pull him up into a boxcar while it's moving, and the police shoot the guy in the back because he's a horse thief. And so
we should note that you deal with, you face life squarely, and you deal with some harsh truths in your book, but also one of the wonderful compensation for the sadness is the eloquence. Your use of words is just incredible, and I must say that as you speak, and as you read your introduction to Ironweed a while ago, I thought you take these dark times and you make them poetry, and then you give us a good laugh along the way as well. I wanted to mention some other books in the cycle, and then we're going to talk about Roscoe, your new book, in our second segment. But Quinn's book takes place in the 19th century, Very Old Bones, which you mentioned, The Flaming Corsage. What a wonderful title that is. This is a cycle, not a series. That's very important, I think, for us to emphasize. And as we note that, I would like to ask you, just in our closing couple of minutes here, is there an overall theme to your work? Your stories take place in Albany, Irish-American characters, lots of politics, innocence versus vice. What do you see as a theme in this cycling?
Well, I don't think of it as a theme. I see these works as interlocking, and never following any particular pattern that I can predict in advance or ever could have thought about in advance. I guess that there would be, the idea of showing a whole spectrum of a society over a long period of years. The working classes that are in there, Billy Phelan and Roscoe. You get the McCalls come out, and the whole Phelan family is working class, and then you get the kind of criminal classes and the marginal classes in Billy Phelan. You get in Legs. You get the night crowd. You get in Roscoe comes the heavy politics, the Irish, the Catholics, the Democrats. That's the nucleus of much of what I'm writing, but not entirely. And there's the other spectrum of, there's a power spectrum of money and political power, and then certainly in the, in the flaming corsage, the old money of the old Dutch and English aristocracy of the city, and in Roscoe you'll get the money, old money, WASP, power, industrialism, and the broad influences that money has in terms of politics.
We want to talk more about Roscoe. So I thank you for being here and agreeing to stay for a second segment because we have lots to talk about. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, and thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.
Writing Out Loud is underwritten by
Koch Industries. Koch is a proud employer of nearly 1,000 Oklahomans. Koch Industries, you know us better than you think.